Well, I'm with another Umtali boy, who I remember from school, but I was junior, so I can't say we were friends. But Jungle Jordan was somebody we all looked up to. He was a Rhodesian swimmer, and actually probably just wanted to be a banker. I don't know, but events overtook him, and John ended up in all sorts of exciting places, which I want him to tell you about more than me. But he was one of the few territorial officers commissioned into the SAS. But we'll come to that later. Jungle, thanks very much for your time. Just a little bit about your early days and how you ended up in the army.
Okay, I was actually born in Bulawayo. My father worked for the Rhodesia Railways, and he was transferred in my second last year at junior school. He was transferred to Umtali. So I did my last year of junior school at Umtali Junior School in the old building that used to be behind the municipal offices across the road from the Market Square. And then I obviously went to Boys High, 1959, started at Boys High and stayed there until 64. Yeah, I think I was an average schoolboy, scraped through, exams and stuff. I was more on the mechanical side than the academic side. So I did woodwork and metalwork and technical drawing and that sort of stuff. And during my school time, I must confess, I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. So when it got towards the end, there were a few options, of course, not as many as there are today, but there were a few. One was you could join the police, you could join the army, you could become a teacher, or you could join the bank. And banking seemed quite cool. In those days, you'll remember we used to wear safari suits in the summer and long trousers and a tie in the winter. So yeah, I started in the bank. You start as a clerk.
It was Netherlands Bank, John?
Sorry?
Netherlands Bank. No,
I started at Standard Bank.
Standard, okay, yeah.
Right on the corner opposite the Cecil Hotel.
Yes.
So I started in the January of 1965, and got my call-up papers, and I was a bit worried because I've just started a new job now, being called up, but of course it was government legislation. So I went into the intake in August of 65, and I did the 4.5 months. So I got out a couple of days before Christmas of 65. And the 4.5 months was basically conventional warfare, Second World War, that sort of thing. Towards the end, I must admit, we did go down to Plumtree. One of the guys on the course with us, Ian Brebner, his parents had a farm down in Plumtree, and we went down there and we started doing what became guerrilla warfare. So they got a group of guys, and they were the tours, and the rest of us tried to track them down, and we played silly buggers. So that was the very start of it. Then of course, January of 66, I was back in the bank and doing what a banker does. And then I can't remember the first year, but I then got my call-up papers to do a call-up with 4RR, which was the Umtali-based battalion. And again, we did a couple of weekend exercises and things around Fern Valley and through those hills and whatever it was. And it again was all conventional stuff. There were stop lines, and we had to try and get through the stop lines. And so trenches, we had to dig trenches, which was a pain in the backside and a waste of time because you had to fill them in afterwards. So that went on for a while. And then we got a call up with Ian Cochrane, Major Ian Cochrane, who was a 4RR officer. And we were deployed on a real mission. You know, that's when we went up towards Marymount Mission with the big trucks, the RL trucks, and we had an entire platoon. And I was a sergeant for that very first one. And very shortly after that, I was commissioned as a lieutenant. And I became one of Ian Cochrane's platoon commanders. And for the rest of my time with 4RR, which went on for several years, I was one of his lieutenants. And every time he did a call up, I was automatically in with him. And I did the normal call up, platoon commander, doing patrols, and all that sort of stuff
John,
in the bush. Yeah.
I just want to chip in there. I mean, I remember the Cochrane family so well because Pete and I were and remain good friends. But just worth noting, Ian Cochrane, the old man, I think was a former British para. He was a Scotsman, but he was also the town clerk, wasn't he? I think
he started. He was in the paras in Scotland, he was in the municipality, and in fact he was with my brother-in-law, Alec Smart. I married his sister, and Alec was in the municipality as well. And Alec was what they called a committee clerk, and Ian Cochrane was at that time, I think he was the treasurer. He was in the treasury, and he became the town treasurer, and then eventually he became the town clerk.
That's right. Yes.
My brother-in-law, Alec, he became a town clerk as well. And he went to Gwello and became a town clerk in Gwello. But we were all 4RR. There were, it was a typical Umtali, you knew everybody. It was standard practice on a Friday night. We would go to the officers' mess, and there was a rotation, and you had to take a meal, or you took something, and all the officers got together. And then when you did a call-up, of course, you did your call-up. Now, just shortcutting the whole thing, those call-ups were good fun, and they started out as good fun, and then as the war escalated, of course, it got more and more serious. And then a 4RR truck hit a landmine, and a guy was killed. And then there were a couple of guys, shot in the bush itself. And it was around about that time. I can't remember exactly when, but we at 4RR got a new training major. And this training major was a guy by the name of Douglas. Tom Douglas. He was RLI, and then Tom Douglas did a hell of a lot. And then, of course, Garth Barrett took over as the training major, and he was beret and belted SAS. And he spent quite a short time, relatively speaking, with 4RR. And at one of those Friday night things, he said to a group of us, myself, Titch Cartwright, Rob Guthrie, he said, I bet you 30 civilians could never make a squadron selection course. And, none of us were sort of going to take this too lightly. So we said, okay, you get us on the next selection course and we'll go and we'll pass. So he said, right, you're on. And he organized it. Next thing, we were on a train with one of those military warrants, and we got to Salisbury. We went to the barracks, and that's when the fun started, because they then took us through to Bulawayo, to Luweran Barracks. And then from there, we went up to the Guaya River mine, which had been abandoned, and they used it. It was SAS training. They used it all the time. And we lived in the sort of houses, and the central area was where all the cooking and admin and stuff were done. We were there for 3 weeks, and we were doing just about everything at the double. You ran to breakfast, you ran to lunch, you ran everywhere. And we did basically a full-on orientation course, and including shooting, rundowns. And the big thing about this was that every single morning you would fall in outside the main building, and standing on a sort of triangular tripod was a bell. And at any one time, anybody could go up and ring the bell. You ring the school bell and you would catch the school bus and go home. It was a voluntary thing. They always insisted this was voluntary. So you, you went through that whole process. And when I did my first selection, there were about 130 guys, of which there were 5 officers. And of those 5 officers, I was a territorial, and the other 2 guys with me, Titch Cartwright and Guthrie. And it ended up after about 2 weeks or so, we were whittling away guys. You know, if they failed, if you didn't get an 80% hit rate on your target rundowns and all that sort of stuff, and if you made a mistake or you just got the hell in and rang the bell. So we got right down to a group of about 40, I suppose it was, 35, 40. We then went to Llewellyn Barracks, and we had what they call a 36-hour pre-rev. So for 36 hours, you do continuous exercise, continually doing something, and every 4 hours, your instructor changed. And, you know, we did the standard pack run, we did PT. I can remember we went swimming in the Llewellyn swimming pool at midnight, you know, because they thought we needed to cool down. And we went through all of that sort of stuff. And then after, it must have been about 24 hours, I never forget, they gave us an exercise. We sat at a desk, and it was some pathetic thing like, there are 4 houses, a red house, a green house, a blue house, and a yellow house. And the guy in the blue house has got a TV, and the guy in the red house has got a dustbin, and the guy in the, and you had to, it was basically a problem-solving thing. But after 24 hours of continuous exercise, it was hell of a difficult to stay awake. And I think they told us afterwards that nobody actually got everything right, but the guys who got more right than others, they were sort of top of the pop. Anyway, eventually at the end of this whole 36 hours, we were loaded onto trucks and taken out to Metopus. And when we got to Metopus, we were given a map. And the interesting thing about the map is when they printed it, they didn't print any roads on it. So it was just contours, but no roads. And at about 10 o'clock midnight, we were put in the back of a covered RL with all the blinds down, and we were taken down a road, and every kilometer and a half, the truck stopped, and the sergeant major in the back shouted, and you got out, one person got out at a time, and the truck carried on. And all you were told was, you've got to be at a destination by 6 o'clock in the morning. So you had effectively 6 hours to get to wherever it was. And I must admit, I was taking a bit of a chance, but I thought, I'm not going to start fiddling around at midnight looking for due north and orientating the map and all that sort of thing. I thought, no bugger it. I'm going to get a couple of hours sleep, hopefully wake up at about 4 in the morning, and with the sunlight or the early morning, orientate the map and make it like hell. I worked on the basis that they're not going to eliminate everybody on the first day. So I'm going to try and get there, you know, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it was. And that's actually what happened. So, and then when you got there, a couple of surprises. The first stop group, first time we got to a point, didn't realize it, but they did us a full inspection, including your rifle, stripped it and said it was dirty, took marks off you, checked your mess tin to make sure you had washed it after you'd used it so that you didn't get sick and that sort of thing. And then they gave you a new destination and said, bugger off, we'll see you at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning at Rhodes's grave or whatever it was. And that's how it went on for about 4 days. And again, guys were getting horribly lost and all that sort of thing. So it was a whittling process. The other thing I remember on my selection was you came across a road. Now, you didn't know where the road was because your map didn't have it. So you thought, well, it's going in the general direction of my compass, so I'm going to walk down the road. And of course, they anticipated this, because then next thing, a Land Rover would come alongside you. And on the back of the Land Rover was a guy sitting in a deck chair with a big sun hat on and drinking a beer and an ice cream. And they would drive alongside you and say, you know, Jungle, don't you want a beer? And of course, the immediate reaction for most people is to say, yeah, sure. And as soon as he accepted the beer, they said, climb on the truck because you're going home. So you just had to carry on walking with this guy drinking this beer and pouring cold water on the road and all that sort of stuff. It was all sort of part of the, but I do remember the end. Well, you didn't know it was the end, of course, but we had to climb a gomo, and I know the gomo had a name, but it was a long granite dome, and you could see guys going up it, and it was almost like ants climbing up this thing, and it just seemed to go on forever. So you're climbing up it, and you get to a point where it then has got like a false horizon, because you go over, you go down into a dip and then back up again. And there was a guy next to me, and when we went over this sort of false horizon and started going down, he just lost it, took his pack off, chucked it on the ground and said, no, this is bullshit, I'm not carrying on with this. And of course that was him, or out. So we went down into the dip, and then you climbed right up to the top. And when you got to the top, of course, there was a guy there. And then they said, well done, you've made it. Do you want a beer? No, I don't want a beer. He said, oh, it's over, it's finished. You can have a beer now. No, I don't trust you. What? You don't trust me? I'm the training major. No, forget it. Where do we go now? And eventually they persuaded us, okay, we're all going to go down to the bottom, and they took us back to a camp, which had all been set up, and there was the cook was there in the kitchen, and we had some food, and it was fantastic. And they said, okay, you can all go and have a shower. It was in the Matopus National Park. Go and have a shower because we're going home. And again, the guy started saying, no, don't believe you. This is a trick. They're going to take us down the road, drop us again, and say, go walk somewhere. But eventually, yeah. And when we got back to Llewellyn, they said, right, you've passed selection. Well done. So it's something that I've always remembered, not the nicest things, but yeah, you remember that very well.
And then, Jungle, you had to go operational. Did that wait, or?
No, what happened was that I had to, because I was, you see, I was in a hell of a strange position because I was a territorial officer. There were one or two other officers, a chap you will know, Mike Rich. Mike Rich was on the same selection as me, but he had come from RLI. I think he had come from RLI. So he was a professional. I was the only territorial officer. So they didn't quite know what to do with me. I had passed selection, which I didn't think I would do, but I did. We then went straight into para school because we had to go to do the para school. So then we went to New Serum, and we had five days there. You do 8 jumps, and on the 8th jump you qualify. So we went to the para school, and on my 8th jump, I actually hit one of those little anthill things, and I broke my ankle. So effectively, I didn't do my last jump. And the records will show that, in fact, I never passed para school, but in fact, I did operational jumps afterwards. A bit of an anomaly. So after para school, yeah, I had to go back to work because my call-up was finished. I had unlike the regulars who that's their job, I had to do everything by doing a civilian call-up. So I went back to work, and then later on, yeah, I was called up to do a course. But at that stage, I didn't have my colors. I was just a territorial guy in the SAS, but I didn't have SAS colors. And it was only after that first op I did with Rich Stannard, the two of us, where they awarded me my colors.
Jungle, just like in a way, I think they threw you in at the deep end there, sending you off with Richard on a two-man op. Just talk us through that whole whole operation. Is very interesting.
Yeah, it was a very interesting one because Martin Pearse was, we were in C Squadron, so Martin was our boss man, Rich. Now, I knew Martin from a civilian point of view because he lived around the corner from me in Mandara. And we had a tennis court and a swimming pool and that sort of stuff. And Martin and his wife, Mo, they used to come around and play tennis. And so, I got to know him from a civilian
social basis.
Yeah, on a social basis. So when I passed and I was I went to C Squadron. I don't know if that was just a coincidence or whatever it was, but yeah, they had that Chimoio thing planned, and it was a debate. There was a huge debate because the ideal situation would have been to do a sort of Mapai type thing and throw in everybody, have a big drop and just sweep right through. But they needed to go and have a look, and it had to be a sort of fairly close in recce. Rich Stannard had worked with Schulenberg, so he knew about close in recces and small two-man, fast-moving. To this day, I don't know why I was selected to go with Rich. I did know him at school, although he was, like yourself, he was junior to me. And I must admit, at school, I knew Rich's uncle, Danny Stannard, from the police in Umtali, but I didn't really know Rich, although he was at Boys High, and I think his reputation was quite well known. So, yeah, and of course, your family, I know very well, particularly your father, because he delivered one of my children at the Umtali maternity ward or maternity hospital. Yeah. So yeah, I happened to be with Rich. There was a whole group of us who went out, and as you know, we went out as a group. We set up a camp, and then the two of us took off from that camp and went towards Chimoio, the Chimoio camp. And we walked a hell of a long way, and we were really stripped down. We only had a small means. We didn't have a big TR-28. And we had food for about 5 days. And the idea was that we were going to go. There was quite a big gomo there that we could get up on, but we didn't know whether or not it was guarded or anything. But so the two of us went there and basically walked into the camp, and we realized we were in the camp when we started seeing paths. So of course we backtracked and walked around the camp, but this was at midnight, so we were not stumbling our way, but we were going very carefully, because the last thing you want to do is to walk into a basher with somebody sleeping. So we managed to get around the hill, around the camp, and we got to the hill. Not quite on the side that we thought we were going to climb it, but we climbed up. It was a bit of a scramble, but we got to the top. And of course, we got to a position where we could see down into the camp. Again, to this day, I do not understand why there was nobody up on that hill. There was nobody there. We were the only ones on there. And it would have been an obvious military thing that would have been something that you had an OP or a defense or. Anyway, we were up there and we observed, and we fortunately, we had some powerful binos, and we had a telescope with a tripod, small one, and we were able to observe, and we saw trucks, we saw quite big area, open areas, that sort of thing. And it was all relayed back to the main squad who had the big means, which they then sent back to Kabrit.
You had a four-man team behind you as a sort of relay team.
Yeah, they were quite away from us. They weren't in close proximity. They were at, and then there was a bigger group much further back. We were the ones right up front. It was interesting because as I say, we only had about 5 days rations, and when you get your ration pack, you sort through it and chuck out what you don't want, and you take with what the tea bags and those sort of issues. And clearly we were going to be there for longer than 5 days when we realized what we were looking at. And of course, the other big issue was that because we had the small means, we had taken a whole lot of batteries with us, but those things chew batteries, the 63. So what we were doing was that we were only switching on at 6 in the morning and 6 at night to conserve batteries. But we did eventually get to the point where what I did is I opened the cardboard casing of the batteries and destroyed one battery and took wires and managed to join them up in parallel so that we could keep the power going. And our recommendation was that they bring in a complete SAS RLI Scouts drop. Anyway, it was politically decided not to happen. It was going to be an Air Force thing. So we were then told about the whole Air Force, how it was going to work. First of all, the Canberras were going to come in, 2 Canberras. Secondly, the Hunters would come in and take out some of the 14.7 anti-aircraft guns that we had spotted. And then lastly, the gunships would come in and take out anything that was moving or anything that was around. So for us, it was quite exciting because we had grandstand seats, although we were lying low. And the Hunters came in, and I was talking the other day, and I was saying, there's some things you never forget. And I can remember this very casual guy on the radio saying, 3-1, this is Green Leader, or whatever his name was. We'll be over your location in figures 2, and told us what to do: lie on your back, looking upwards so that you can see anything coming down, and to lie with your mouth open. And I couldn't figure that one out at the time. Anyway, we lay there, and next thing we see, you don't hear them, because as they're coming in, they've obviously throttled back and they're sort of getting the right speed. And they went past, and we heard them going past. And then what I will remember for a long time was that there was noise. There were bird noises, there were sound of the wind, there were all sorts of things. And then these planes went past, and then there was the most almighty bang. I have never heard a bang like that before. You realize why you got your mouth open, because your whole chest just sort of heaves. We were quite close to we were less than 5 kilometers, probably 2 kilometers away from this thing. And what I remember was the silence. It just went dead quiet, not a thing. There were no birds, the wind seemed to stop, and it was just eerily quiet. And we sort of rolled over and crawled towards the edge where we could look down. And where we had been looking down for about 4 or 5 days with trees and paths, and there was nothing. We were looking down at a desert. It was just clear, no trees, no grass, nothing. I mean, 2 1,000-pound bombs, it destroyed everything. So, we reported that back. Oh, and the other thing I didn't was that the choppers, the helicopters, when they came in, one of them, which wasn't a gunship, came up from the backside of the hill and came up to the top of the hill and hesitated to the point that they were able to drop a box on the on the top of the mound, and they just carried on. So they didn't want to compromise us. Yeah, but they were, and that was batteries and rations, and the cook had given us in polystyrene, or Bakelite as we knew, or the polystyrene. He had given us a steak and chips and a cold beer. So anyway, they dropped that off, and then they were gone, and everything was gone. So we were able to then, with new batteries, we were able to relay what had happened, and there was nothing moving and all that sort of thing. And our anticipation was that we would be told to come down and make our way back. But in fact, a message then came through. They wanted us to stay at least another 2 days with our fresh ration to see if anything happened, if anything moved and that sort of thing. So that's what we did. There were a couple of visits from the Frelimo. They drove through, they didn't stop, they didn't get off, nothing. They just drove around and then disappeared again. So, you know, it was a case of best left alone. So, and we never saw anything else after that. And we then were given the order, okay, come down. So one afternoon, the following afternoon, late afternoon, we made our way down from the hill, going down the back side, opposite to where the camp had been. And the two of us were going, moving along. And one of us, I'm not sure which one of us, actually saw a track or a path in front. So we both went down, and Rich said to me, go forward, you know, it's indicated, go forward, have a look. So I went forward and I looked at the track, and I could see it had obviously been used. There were footprints and barefoot and booted prints down the road, down the track. So I then turned, I was crouching, and I turned to start coming back. And that's when we heard the MAG, and MAG started going. So it was a case of no longer crouching, now flat on your stomach, crawling. And Rich responded immediately. He saw where the fire was coming from, and he replied very quickly. And I managed to crawl back and get behind something, and I then took up the fire. Rich went back, and we did the buddy system, but backwards. So we got away from what we thought was the center of this thing. And eventually we sort of signaled to each other to get up, and we got up and we started running. We started moving fast. And that's when Rich took over, and he said, right, we got to start anti-tracking. So we were going for rock outcrops. We were going for rivers, little streams. We were walking down rivers. And at one stage we did a 90-degree turn and went not quite back where we had come from, but we did this 90-degree turn, and because there was more rock outcrop and stuff. And that went on for quite a long time, a couple of Ks, 9 Ks. And eventually I signaled to Rich, and I said, you know, the two of us got together, and I said, my leg's bloody sore, I don't know what's happened. So he said, well, let's have a look. And it was my left leg, and we stopped and had a look. Didn't really realize what had gone on, but there was blood all down the lower part of my denim, my camouflage denim. And you know, you didn't really sense any moisture because we'd been walking in rivers, so boots were wet and that sort of thing. Anyway, we put our first field dressing on it, bandaged it up, and carried on.
It was you'd been shot. It was a bullet hole.
I'd been hit. And it had gone right through my leg, just above my knee. Most incredible thing. Doctors said later, when we got to the Umtali hospital, got back, never seen anything like it. The bullet went straight through, missed the tibia, missed the fibula, and more importantly, missed the artery. It went straight through. How the hell it did it, I don't know, but it did.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was later on. Anyway, we went, got further back, by which stage Martin Pearse was up ahead in a one of those little push-pull aircraft, the ones with the engine at the front and at the back.
The Lynx.
Yeah, the Lynx, that's it. Yeah. And he was flying high, and he radioed us and he said, look, the chopper's coming in to pick you up. Try and find yourself an LZ. But of course, it's all at Mapani and it's all the same level. And, unless you're above, you can't see open areas. We were just going in a direction. And eventually when the chopper came and they picked us up, and with the radio, they were able to hone in on us. And they came straight towards us. And when they were overhead, the guy said, look, there's nothing here that I can put down. I'm going to lower the trapeze. So he hovered above the trees and he put the trapeze down, and Rich got on one side and I got on the other. Slight weight difference, but both hanging on to the cable. And he lifted, he picked us up. And the idea being is that he would lift straight up until we were above the trees, and then he would go forward. But as the story goes, when he was lifting us up, I don't know what happened, but he started losing power, and the only thing he could do was go forward, in other words, and to regain forward momentum and get some lift. But we weren't out of the trees. So for about 100 yards or so, 100 meters or so, we were dragged through the top of the trees. And I actually lost my hold on the cable, and I just grabbed onto a tree, and the chopper flew off with Rich hanging on it, and it was swinging around and around, swinging and going around, and I was left in the tree, hanging on, and I had to wait there. You don't quite know what's happening. The guys are somewhere behind you. We thought we had lost them, but they were quite close. And the chopper went off, and then after some time, I heard it coming back. And obviously they were looking for me because they were flying quite slowly. So I got as high as I could in the tree, because the higher up you go, of course, the smaller the branches become. And I got to a point where I couldn't go any higher, but I stood up as best I could, and they came towards me, and they were moving sideways with the tech looking out the one side and the pilot the other, and they came towards me sideways, and the idea being that I would climb in, but there was no ways I could climb in, and all I could see was that the back wheel of the Alouette. So I sort of waved my arms to the tech, and I said, I'm coming, I'm going to jump. And I jumped and I grabbed the back wheel. And fortunately, the pilot, sort of anticipated it, because he threw the stick the opposite way to compensate for the sudden weight. And we did a bit of a dance there, but he managed to lift up and went off, and then picked up Rich where he had been dropped, and made our way back to Antali, or to the border, and we missed out. We had gone from the border, but we went straight back towards Grand Reef. They were going to drop me at the hospital, but it was decided that because of the uniforms that we were wearing and the camouflage and all that sort of thing, that it would, we must go back to Grand Reef, and I had to change and strip off and all that sort of stuff. And then we drove in a Land Rover to Umtali Hospital, which is where I went in and had the operation. Well, just tidied it up, and a couple of days later, we did a road trip back to Salisbury, back to Kibrit.
Jungle, it's a bit of a sad story, but you'd become very good friends with Martin Pearse, and you were on the operation when he was killed. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Just talk us through that. I know it's quite an involved story, but it's a very interesting one. So I think it was Op Carpet, wasn't it?
Yeah, Carpet. It was Carpet. Yeah. it was interesting in that it was supposedly, just a bit of background, supposedly it was a non-confrontational operation. Okay, it was actually in Lusaka itself, but it was a safe house in a suburb of Lusaka, Roma Township. It was supposedly a safe house where there were documentation and all sorts of stuff. And we were told that there wouldn't be any fighting or a punch-up. So the idea was to get as much of the documentation as we could. So the whole thing was set up whereby it was a suburban house in a suburb. They had vibratite walls around it. There were 2 choppers that went on the road in front of the house and 2 choppers that went on the road behind, but they had to go through another property to get to the particular house. So on that operation, I wasn't involved. Rich was involved with going right into the house itself. I was involved. I was dropped got out of the chopper in front of the house, and I went east, and Petrol Pete, who was the other guy, he went west, and we were going to stop any traffic coming in on the road, moving on the road. And as soon as we got out, and the guys who were going to breach the wall from the front, because the 2 choppers on the opposite road, they were going to breach the wall at the back of the house. So they had guys coming in from both sides. So I went down the road and lay in the ditch there just to stop anybody coming or going or whatever it was. I thought it would be a sort of, quiet post, but there was so much activity. I mean, when 4 choppers land on a road in a suburb, there were all sorts of people looking over walls and all sorts. It was happening. My part of the scene was that I saw a guy coming from my back. So I've got my back to this house, and there's all sorts of activity going on. Obviously, they've got the shaped charge where they blew the wall so they could get through into the house. When they were at the house, there were bunker bombs going off and things like that. So I had my back to the wall, and I sort of was turning back every occasionally to see, what was going on there. And next thing I saw this guy coming towards me from behind. So he's coming from the house towards me. And I went and stopped him. And he was quite, amiable and all sorts of things. And I said to him, where are you going? Oh, no, he's a gardener. He's just going down the road there. And I don't know why, but, his speech, he was not your traditional gardener. And I said, no, you're not going anywhere. And we all had cable ties. We carried the cable ties in case we needed to just tie anybody up. So I grabbed him and I put the cable ties on him, and I turned and took him back towards the house. But I radioed and I said, look, I've got this guy and I think he's suspicious. And they said, okay, we'll send somebody to pick him up. You must go back to your post. So I waited. They picked him up, took him back to the Garth Barrett's chopper. I went back to my post. And the other thing that happened for me, I mean, there's a hell of a lot going on, and I don't know all of it, but the other thing that happened to me was that a car came hurtling down the road towards us. And, it was a case of, do you stand up and stop them and expose yourself, or do you? So I sort of sat up and I waved to this guy to stop. He jumped out, and next thing I saw that he had a camera and all sorts of stuff. And so I needed to discourage him. So I shot at his car. It was a little Fiat Uno, if I remember correctly. And I put a couple of bullets into the Uno, and of course he turned around and he was off, he was gone. On the other side, Petrol Pete, he had a similar sort of incident in that somebody came down the road again. The word must have just got out because everybody was taking videos and wanting to, capture something. Anyway, the long and the short of it with regards to Martin was that they were coming in at this house from the four corners, basically. Rich was on the one side, Martin on another side, and then the two other guys coming off the back road. Martin threw a bunker bomb. Effectively, a bunker bomb was, it's like a hand grenade, but a bit bigger, and it's plastic explosive, and it's got no shrapnel. So it's just a plastic tube with plastic explosive and a detonator. And you throw that in, and it's a percussion, and it's just to stun anybody or anything. Well, what happened was that Martin threw this thing in through the window, then went back with his back to the wall. And when the blast went, of course, the window goes. But unknown to us, that house was not well constructed because the whole wall fell on top of Martin. The whole wall came down and fell on top of him. And of course, he was the leader of the whole, and he went silent. And then that's when Rich took over, and they went in. And there were two things that they had to do. One is to get as much of the documentation as possible from, we knew where it was. The int was very good. They knew where it was. We had gone in there with big canvas bags, and they just emptied drawers into the canvas bags and then dragged them out to the road where the all four choppers would come and pick us up. So that was the one part of the operation. The other one, of course, now was unplanned in that we had to get Martin's body out of there. So one of the four crew, they had to pull the bricks away and find Martin and get him out. So that was happening at the same time as, because the other big thing, we were on the clock with regards to time, because they were well aware of the fact that there were Russian MiGs sitting on the Lusaka runway. Plus there were, the Zambian army. So time was of an essence. We had wasted a bit of time coming in, because if you read the book, you'll know that the wind was a big factor, and we were blown off course, which meant that they had to change direction and bring us in from a slightly different angle. Also lost us some time. And the other big issue, of course, is that the choppers started, or one of the choppers was low on fuel. So when we left, we went down the main street, and we had pamphlets that we threw out saying that we were there purely for the ZANU. We had nothing to do with the Zambian army. We had nothing to do with the Zambian people. And so the pamphlets were thrown out as we went down the main street, and they went very low. I mean, we were just going above the roofs of the main street because of the fact that they wanted to get out of Lusaka before the MiGs, if they did come. They didn't actually come, but that's what was happening when we left. The other thing is that despite the fact that one crew weren't able to get all the documentation they wanted to, we had enough documentation to fool all four choppers. And a lot of us were actually standing on the skids of the choppers, holding on, because there was nothing, you couldn't get into the chopper. So they brought a huge amount of documentation out of there. We got out, the chopper I was in, we got across the river, flew back, and we got across the river and we landed, Monopools area. But the one chopper, he had to auto-rotate, and he landed in Zambia, on the Zambian side, and they had to go across with fuel and refuel his chopper so he could lift up and come across. So yeah, unfortunately, that was, from there, all the bags were put onto a Dakota and flown straight back to New Serum, to Kabrit. And as the book will show you, later on, certain people were arrested, and because they were known to have been collaborating. From the documentation showed it all. Yeah.
Jungle and the chap you captured, the prisoner?
Hannes, I've been trying to remember his name, but it was quite famous, and he actually was the 2IC of the unit there, and I can't remember his name. But it's in the book. I mean, for me, he was just wrong to be a gardener, and it was just gut instinct. And I just said, no, there's something wrong here. He spoke too well, and he was quite casual. And
it turned out I think he was the number 2 guy in the whole intelligence system. He was very, very important capture.
Yeah,
he had lots of information.
And in fact, later on, he gave us a huge amount of information, which resulted in more raids and other raids, and different parts of the army were involved. So it was very lucky.
It's hard to articulate, I suppose, but that transition from being a banker, you're working in a bank in a perfectly civilized environment one day, and the next day you're in all sorts of trouble. I mean, it's not many people go. I mean, the professional soldiers, that's their job, but for you, it must have been quite a big adjustment to go from one to the other so quickly.
Hannes, it was very different, and I have said all along that what kept me sane was the fact that I was a banker. So, for about 6 weeks or 7 weeks or whatever it was, I was in a normal environment with normal people and doing a normal job. The other thing I think, which had a huge amount in my favor, was the fact that I was married and I had 2 children. I think I was not the oldest, but I was certainly one of the older people to pass selection. When I passed selection, I was over 32, 33 years old. So I wasn't the oldest. I mean, there have been older guys, but I was married with 2 children. And that also, it had its advantages, also had its disadvantages. You're leaving the family, you're going away. You're not just doing a border patrol call-up. I mean, you're doing, as you say, you're doing some real hairy stuff. A couple of the things that happened, I would never tell Noreen about. I mean, I never said a thing because I didn't think it was right or fair. But by the same token, we just carried on as normal. We were a normal family and took the kids to school, went to the bank, came back home again, that sort of stuff.
But being in a 2-man situation with Richard, there's not too much conversation for somebody who likes to shoot the breeze. You just have to keep your trap shut.
Look at it. Rich was the professional soldier. And of course, it made a lot of sense to me that when you're sitting on top of a hill and you're the only 2 guys for 50 kilometers, you don't advertise the fact that you're around. So no, we didn't talk at all. The 2 of us, they were the grunts, and I would sort of say to him, I'm changing the batteries, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that, or whatever it is. The other thing is that what was different, or what was difficult, was that when you're in a camp, you're doing a border patrol camp, you've got a camp, and you can sit down and you can put on your little stove and you can boil some water and make a cup of tea and that sort of. I mean, we couldn't do that. You can smell that gas a mile away. We couldn't cook any food because you can smell it a mile away, that sort of thing. So those are the sort of things that were a big difference for me, coming from a territorial army into this very elite unit. Suck it up, sweetheart. That's the way it was. I mean, you ate dry rations. you drank water, and you just carried on. You had to. It was very different, you know. In the territorial army, as I say, you normally had a base camp. You had a cook. You could have a cup of tea, you know, that sort of thing. Whereas when you're sitting on top of the hill, the last thing you want to do is for anybody to know that you're there. So you just keep very quiet. And what it did do, it forced me, anyway. I spent a lot of time with the binos, you know, with a bit of camouflage netting thrown over you and that sort of thing. I spent a hell of a lot of time just looking and observing and watching, and you're looking for anything different, anything that, and I think that's part of the reason why we were able to pick up where the trucks were. There were some very big trucks there that they used for transporting troops. Some of the 14.5 anti-aircraft guns, at first glance, you don't see them because they also had camouflage nets over them and that sort of thing. But by spending a lot of time just looking, yeah, you could eventually pick them up. But yeah, I'm probably talking too much, which is why you're saying for somebody who can shoot the breeze. Yeah, it was different. Yeah.
Jungle, thanks very, very much for your time. Fascinating story, and yeah, I'll take my hat off to you. You did some amazing stuff, and I'm just pleased we've got this on the record.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. And it's nice to see you again, Hannes.
Thanks, Jungle. Nice to be in touch. And I'll see you soon, I hope.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.